Hello, my name is Melanie Mock, and I am a professor of English in the Department of Language and Literature. I also teach journalism courses here at George Fox, and so I'm going to talk to you today about what we can look for in news stories as we check for biases. Something that's very hard to do now when we are all so divided on so many things, and when we often look for news that confirms our biases rather than being unbiased or balanced. Let's look together at a story about one of my favorite sports and one of my favorite sports teams, the United States women's soccer team. Already, you may be having some feelings of bias when you hear me talk about women's soccer. You may, like me, think that the women's soccer team is one of the best teams in sports right now. Or you may think that women's soccer is boring and that the U.S. team especially, is politicized. So, one way to confirm or think about biases is, as you look at a news story, to check your own biases, what you feel about a story before you even start interrogating it. So the story I'm going to look at happened a few years ago when some news outlets claimed that the Women's World Cup team dishonored a World War II vet by turning away from him and the flag during the national anthem. This story in Newsmax reports that this dishonor took place. If you look at the sources, though, the sources for this news story are tweets by Richard Grenell and somebody named Paris Denard. These are both former Trump officials who call the event shameful and a disgrace. Using that language itself might seem biased. There are no quotes in the story from players or soccer officials or from those who were on the field. Only the tweets of several people who it's not clear whether they watched the game live or not. In this case, because the reporter is only including tweets, there is some bias on the part of the reporter. The reporter didn't pursue other sources, just those that supported one version of the stories. In some ways, we could argue they weren't patient enough to report after all the facts were in and just wanted to get the story out immediately about what they saw as a dishonorable event. So let's step back for a second and ask, what is a fact after all? Right now, we think there are alternative facts, that there can be facts in disagreement with each other. But a definition of a fact is something that is verifiable, for which there is sufficient evidence, rather than something based only on a person's viewpoint or opinion. This article doesn't have the journalist saying "I," like most opinion pieces might, but it doesn't need to. This perspective, the language used, the lack of quotes from people on the pitch suggests that this story is biased. Pursuing facts takes time. It takes more than basing a story on a few tweets, which is what happened in this case, making this article seem incredibly biased. You can also see biases in the language that's used, in the images that are provided. The BBC story was written a day after the Newsmax story, but it provides a different set of sources and a different kind of biases. Note that the BBC story includes sources from the United States women's national team, but it also includes sources from a Fox Sports commentator. In the latter case, the quote is indeed biased, but that does not make the article itself biased. In fact, I would argue this is an unbiased article, as far as any article can be unbiased, because it uses several viewpoints. It uses the Fox Sports commentator. It uses people who were on the pitch. It includes the United States national women's team, the governing body for soccer. It uses evidence from videos showing that the women were looking at different flags on the pitch and therefore we're not dishonoring the vet, but we're looking at the flags during the Pledge of Allegiance. The story also provides context. If you look towards the end of the story, it discusses the broader context that there are athletes, including Megan Rapinoe, who played for the women's soccer team, showing that this story matters because there's a controversy unfolding in the United States about whether athletes should stand for the anthem. In this particular story, the journalist takes time to find the evidence. It's not biased in the story to say that the women, at least in this instance, dishonored the vet by protesting the anthem, because the evidence shows that in this instance, the video describes something else. Women just looking at a different flag. Looking at both articles, you might wonder, what is the truth? Did the women's soccer team dishonor a World War II vet by turning away from him? Or did, as the BBC reports, the women were actually honoring the vet, but were looking at a flag as the national anthem was played? The reporter in the BBC takes the time to find the evidence. He looks at video from the pitch. He provides different sides to the story. And then you can also look on Twitter. And in this instance, there's video evidence showing that the women's soccer players actually honored the vet by giving him the game ball and by signing it for him. And you can just see the video for yourself, that the women were not dishonoring the vet. Including right there, Megan Rapinoe, who was considered shameful and disgraceful by the Newsmax writers. At any rate, finding biases is very difficult. It takes time. It takes patience. Just one other way that we can be working on our cornerstone character virtue as we write this paper.